speakers, have opportunities to ask questions, and most importantly, ensure that when it comes to the Holocaust that we truly never forget. So really grateful that you're here to join us and to learn, listen, and have an opportunity to engage with some of our incredible guest speakers today. One of the best parts of my job, the best part of my job, is getting to work with some extraordinary students. And Yana Tartakovsky, who is our Vice President of Marketing for UConn Hillel, is the individual whose vision and leadership and initiative brought this event to life. It was her idea many months ago to make sure that we were truly honoring Holocaust Remembrance Day in a really meaningful way. So I'm very grateful to her leadership, as well as to Jess Baden, our student board president, and our entire student board leadership at Hillel. It's truly an honor to work with them, and makes me really hopeful about our future. So with that in mind, I would like to welcome up Yana and Jess to the stage to start our program.
Hi everyone, I'm Yana. I am a sophomore healthcare management major and a political science minor. As Adina mentioned, I am the Vice President of Marketing at UConn Hillel, and I was one of the many people who made this event happen. I want to thank Adina and all of our staff at Hillel for helping me plan this event. It really does mean a lot to see it be executed. I want to say thank you to Nina Jacobs, our Holocaust survivor who was able to make it in person. I think that her story will be very meaningful to all of us. I wanted to say thank you to Jake and our panelists. Jake will be moderating our panel after Nina shares her testimony and we take a short break. For now, I just wanted to let Jess Baden, our student board president, introduce herself.
Everyone, my name is Jess. I'm a junior studying human development and family sciences here at UConn from Stamford, Connecticut, and I'm also the president of the student board here. I've been so incredibly impressed with Yana having put this together. When she first came to me with this, I called it her passion project because I could see the passion in her eyes and the desire to put this on, and it's really, really incredible to see it come to fruition and really watch this amazing event happen as well.
Thank you. So right now we're going to take a moment to commemorate the 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust with a candle lighting ceremony. We have a short poem to read here, and then we will light the candles and say a prayer. To the 6 million who died 78 years ago, you were swept out by the whirlwind. Yet we always remember you, and tonight we mourn. We mourn how you, brothers and sisters of the Jewish people, were stolen from us, and how your lives were stolen from you. We mourn what you were destined to become: writers, scientists, politicians, and composers, parents, teachers, defenders, champions of your people. As we light these candles tonight, we remember you. We honor your lives and your good deeds. We sanctify your good names. We light these candles and we bless your memory. We say never again, because we will always stay committed to honoring the lives of all those we lost.
I will now be saying the mourner's Kaddish. Please sit or stand according to your custom. Yit gadal ve'yit hadash shemei rabah. Ve'amal divrach yirteh ve'amich machuteh. Ve'chayechon u'gamechon u'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. V'agalah u'bizman kariv v'yimaru. Amen. Yehei shmei rabah mevarach le'olam u'amei omayam. Yitbarach ve'yishtabach ve'yipa'ar ve'yitramah ve'yitnaseh. Ve'yitadar ve'yitalel ve'yitalal. Shmei Jekudisha, Richu. Le'elah min kol berchata b'shirata, tush b'chata b'nechemata, da'amiram be'amal v'imru. Amen. Yehi shlam rabba min shemaya, b'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom v'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. You may be seated.
I would now like to welcome to the stage our Holocaust survivor, Nina Jacobs. I don't want to share too much about her because I know she has a lot prepared about her testimony, but I'm very honored to welcome her here. I'm very thankful that she's here to share her testimony with us because I'm a strong believer of talking to Holocaust survivors to continue remembering all those that we lost. If you may help me welcome Nina Jacobs to the stage.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming, and thank you to Hillel for inviting me to speak to you, because I think it's so important to get out the story of the Holocaust. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the atrocities at the different camps, but as a child survivor, my story is very different because I was not in a camp. So I don't want to get ahead of myself, which I always do, which is why I have to keep notes. I'm going to give you a little background because I'm not sure how much you are familiar with, but Poland had the largest Jewish population of any European country. And the reason for that was when you go back to about 1200, the Prince of Poland had invited the Jewish people to come to Poland. And they were given citizenship, which was absolutely amazing, and they were allowed to practice their faith. And part of the reason for the invitation was that the Jewish people were tradespeople, so they helped the economy, they built the middle class. When Hitler's army marched into Poland on September 1st, 1939, it was only 83 years ago. When people many times hear the story about the Holocaust, they think it was like years and years ago. Why do they keep talking about it? And I'm sorry. 83 years ago, most of us have grandparents. I am one. 83 years of age, so it isn't like it had hundreds of years ago. It's really not that long ago. When Hitler's army invaded Poland, the Jewish population was 3.3 million. It was the largest Jewish population of any country in Europe. Now, when we talk about millions, or I talk about millions, I try to make it relatable. So the entire population of the state of Connecticut is 3.6 million. So if you can imagine that everybody in Connecticut was killed. So can you just picture the streets, the homes, everything being empty? It would look like an atomic bomb had exploded there. But that is how many people were living in Poland at the time. When the Nazis came into Poland, they immediately instituted different laws, and they started by every man, woman, and child wearing a yellow star with the name J-U-D-E, Jude. And why yellow? Because it stood out, for one, and it was very easy to separate the population because they immediately saw that star, they knew you were a Jew. They established curfews. Jewish children were no longer permitted to go to public schools with their friends. They looted and they destroyed all the shops, the stores. And in essence, the life of the Jewish people was suddenly turned upside down. At the same time that this was happening, ghettos were being established. Once these ghettos were established, the roundup of the Jewish people began. So if you can imagine a family sitting down to dinner, and all of a sudden you hear pounding and yelling and knocking at your door. I was going to say in German how to open the door, but anyhow, open the door, open the door. And the father would go and open the door, and all of a sudden, the soldiers would march in, and they would be screaming, "Pack a suitcase, just what you need, just pack a small," and the children were terrified, looking at their parents. Oh, what should we do? We don't know. And the parents that are supposed to be their protectors are equally helpless. So they go and they pack little suitcases, and the little boy takes his car, and the little girl takes her doll, and they're marched out into the street. And now you have rows and rows and rows of families standing side by side with their little suitcase, not knowing where they're going, what's next, and they will never return to that home. And the food is left on the table as it was, and off they went. Now, where were they marched? They were marched into the ghettos. Now, this ghetto in Vilna, which is the city where I was born, had 139,000 people living in it at the time. It was like a small little, I don't know, not even village. And now they put 400,000 people into the same area. There was the only access in and out of that ghetto was through one gate. The Germans were at the gate, armed Germans. They controlled everything that went in and out of the ghetto, meaning food, water, anything that people would ordinarily need. So now they walk in as a family. Now, where do you go? What do you do? Let's find a little place for ourselves. So, I'm sorry. I've done this many, many times, but it doesn't get any easier because as I tell it to you, I think about the families, etc. Conditions in the ghetto, needless to say, were absolutely appalling and horrific. Everybody was looking for a little space for their family to be together, and the spaces were hard to come by. Diseases became very rampant. Every day there were people dying, and those bodies were put outside of the building, and somebody came with those huge wooden carts like farmers would use, and they would stack the bodies and take them to a pit someplace to be buried. The Germans would storm the ghetto 24/7. That was to keep everybody off kilter. They never knew, the Jewish people never knew from one minute to the next, am I going to be okay? Is my family going to be okay? What's going to happen to us? Nobody knows their fate. And they like keeping it. Keep that morale. Keep it low. Don't let them know what's going on. Spread rumors. And that was constant. And that was like in the ghetto. So into the ghetto went my uncle, and I'll give names because it'll be easier to refer to people. So of course the names are Hebrew. So my uncle Mesha, his wife Frida, my mother Lena, and my father Yitzchak, and they were newlyweds. My mother was 21, my father was 25, my grandmother, and my little cousin Dora. So they went into the ghetto as a family. Now, prior to going into the ghetto, my uncle Mesha, who was 8 years older than my mother, he had a very large leather tanning factory. And so he was deemed important to the Germans. Why? What did they wear? Leather boots, leather shoes, leather gloves, leather everything. So he had certain privileges that other people didn't have because of his skill. So he was given a yellow pass called a shiner, because yellow shines, and he was given that pass, and he had access in and out of the ghetto, and because of that, he was able to leave the ghetto try to scrounge food and bring it back for us. As I said, my parents were newlyweds, and the conditions in which they were living, which was this tiny little space, and they were young and they wanted a breath of fresh air, and it was a very hot night in July, and so they said, okay, we'll just sneak out. We'll just sneak out for a couple of minutes and we'll come back. Well, those couple of minutes, the Nazis caught them. They arrested my mother, they arrested my father. They went into different prisons. The next day, my mother was released from prison with many other women, and the men were taken to an empty pit, it's called Pinar, and from dawn until dusk, 6,000 men were murdered. The guns were going constantly. It takes a long time to murder 6 people. You would hear the screams, you would hear the cries, you would hear the prayers of people knowing that their lives were ending for no reason. They didn't commit a crime, they were just Jewish. That evening, my mother came back to the little space she shared with my father, and because he had not returned, she realized that he had been murdered. Now, I just want to say that before going into the ghetto, I'm sort of backtracking a little, because the Nazis could not have done, meaning killed 6 million people, were it not for the help of the collaborators. In every single country, there were collaborators that stood in their doors and pointed, this is a Jewish home, this is a Jewish home, this is a Jewish home. They made it extremely, extremely easy for the Nazis to know where to find Jewish people, and that was across the board. When I say that 6,000 men were killed, again, I like to give you an example of what 6,000 looks like. If you're from Connecticut, and if you've ever gone to Goats to see them play, they're a little baseball team, and it's a small stadium, but the stadium has 6,000 seats. Picture 6,000 seats, if you close your eyes, being completely empty. That was how many men they killed. About a month or so later, my mother recognized that she was pregnant. And the Nazis had decreed any Jewish woman found pregnant in the ghetto would be killed. What to do? So my mother says to her mother, my grandmother, I have to have abortion under these conditions. How do I bring a child into the world? And my grandmother said, no, you won't have an abortion. Whatever will happen to us will happen to the child. But let there be an indication in the world that in case that child lives, that the child once had a father that was murdered. That child is me. So my mother hid her pregnancy throughout the time, and when I was born, they found a little attic crawl space where I stayed with my mother for 17 months. Now, prior entering the ghetto, my uncle had prearranged with 3 separate families. He approached them, Polish families. He approached them and he said, when the time comes, will you be willing to help? Now, they didn't know what help was required. My uncle didn't know what help he was going to ask of them, but they agreed. So when I was 17 months old, I had a cousin, Myra, a year older than myself. My uncle heard rumors that they're coming to take the last remaining children out of the ghetto. So with all the rumors that he had heard during the time that They were in the ghetto. He heard them, but he really did not react to them. But when he heard that they were coming to take the last remaining children, that meant me, and that meant his daughter. And he didn't know where or how in the world he would be able to hide us. So he left the ghetto with his pass, his shina, and he went to one Polish woman, and he said to her, I have a child. She said, boy or girl, because it was easier to hide a girl than a boy. My uncle said a girl. The woman said, I'll take her. He did the same thing with another Polish woman and arranged to meet each of these Polish women on a given day at a given time in the forest in Poland. So he took his daughter first. We were very little petite kids where we didn't have much good teeth. He gave her some wine to drink. She fell asleep. He wrapped her in a sheet, put her under his armpit, put on a big overcoat, went to the gate, showed the shiner to the soldiers. They let him through. He went into the forest and he passed the sleeping bundle to the Polish woman. Not to make it conspicuous, the next day he did the same thing with me. Gave me a wave, and that was it. I woke up at 17 months of age in a strange environment. And I'm asking, and the only language I was able to speak was Yiddish, and I only knew 3 words. I was asking for my mother. And they're speaking Polish to me, and when they heard me speak Yiddish, they became extremely frightened. What on earth are they going to do with me? If the Nazis come to their house and they see a child that speaks Yiddish, everybody will be killed. So in the house was the father, Janek, his son, Jan, and his 2 elderly parents. So they commiserated and they decided the only place they could really put me was in their root cellar. Now, to explain to you what the root cellar was, in case you're not familiar with that, there were no refrigerators at that time. And Poland is a very cold country. So the vegetables that they would gather during their harvest, they would put under the house, on the ground, and that served as their refrigeration. So what they did with me was, they dug a grave underneath their root cellar, and they put me in there. And now, I'm in this black hole. Everything is dirt around me. I can't speak. They don't know what else to do with me. So after 10 days, my uncle meets the woman that he had given me to, and he says to her, how is she doing? And the woman says, we doubt that we'll be able to keep her because all she does is scream for her mother. And my uncle says, where I'm going, I cannot take a baby. Eventually, she will stop screaming. Now, my cousin, who was given to a different Polish woman, somebody had reported to the SS, which is German soldiers, that this woman is harboring a Jewish child. They took the woman and they took my cousin to Gestapo headquarters. And for 24 hours, you will admit, you will admit, you will admit, you're harboring a Jewish, you will admit, and they were beating her the whole time. But she knew that if she admitted, they would kill her, they would kill Myra. And she resisted the entire time. And then they take Myra. But this woman was very clever. She had taught her how to hold her hands and pray. She told her how to cross herself. So when they interrogated this little 3-year-old, all she spoke was Polish. And she made sure that, she was very careful with her prayers. They let her go. So I was very fortunate that that did not happen to me. When they brought me up, almost 2 weeks in the grave, well, needless to say, I was filthy. I remember them giving me a bath, and then I had, because I didn't say anything, those few little words in Yiddish anymore, I had, you know, the run of the space. So Yannick was the head of the household, and he just absolutely adored me, and I him. He was like the replacement for my mother, because he was so loving. He had wanted a child. His wife had passed away, and so it never occurred to him that anybody would survive, meaning my uncle would survive to come and take me back. So as far as he was concerned, I was his daughter. And that's how I stayed. When he felt that it was safe, he brought me to church, and he had me baptized, and he gave me his name, the feminine version, because he was Yannick, so I became Yanina. And that is all that I knew. Now, this is my father. I didn't know the word mother because I didn't have a mother in the house. And the war ends in 1945. And now my mother is liberated by the Russian army. And this woman and an old woman, they come to see me every day. And I would say to Yannick, here come those two very nice ladies to visit me. I didn't know it was my mother. I didn't know it was my grandmother. I had no memories of them whatsoever. They were strangers. And because they were living in displaced persons camps, DP for short, so I'm sure you've seen on TV people living in tents, war-torn countries, etc. That's what it was like in the displaced persons camp, that kind of an environment. So my mother had nothing to offer me. The conditions were very difficult in these camps, and so I remained with Yannick because at least I was safe and taken care of. One day, and by now I'm almost 4 years of age, my mother comes with my aunt and they say to me, why don't we go pick some nice flowers? Well, I love flowers. So off we go, we pick the flowers, and now they take me to where they're staying. And it's getting dark, and I'm asking to go home. And I'm being told that this is your home now. This is your mother. It meant nothing to me. The word mother meant, I knew what a mother was, but it meant nothing to me because I didn't have any connection with her. And this is where you have to stay now. So now everything I experienced when I was initially given away, I was experiencing now when my mother took me back, which was total hysteria. I want to go to Yannick, I want to go to my home, I want to go to my home. And over and over and over for days and weeks and weeks. It went on like that. And finally, he just stopped, which I did. And we stayed there in Poland for 6 months. And the way for us to come to the United States was, firstly, you had to be bonded, and there were quotas. So even though my mother was liberated in 1945, we didn't come to America until 1949, 4 years later. But we had to leave Poland to go to Germany, because that was going to be the permanent place for us to stay. From there, we would board the ships to go to the United States. So, as the war is over, and we could only travel at night by American U.S. trucks, because they were still killing the Jewish people in whatever city, every town that they went back to. If a Jewish person went back to his home to see if any family survived, he did not survive. They killed him because they thought, you're coming back to reclaim your house, your property, your this. They killed him because they had already taken possession of everything. So we went traveled at night, and I remember this very vividly, traveling by American, big US on the thing that covers the top that covered the top of the truck, and we traveled by night to Germany, and we arrived in another ghetto. But this time the ghetto was different because it was armed by Jewish police. And we stayed there for 2 years until our number came up that we could board a boat and come to the United States. But before I close, I just want to give you some information about my family. So my mother was one of 5. Only she and one brother survived. 3 of her siblings were murdered with their families, with their extended families, aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody. My father was one of 9, as I told you, one of 10, I should say. As I told you, he was murdered. One of his brothers, 1 out of 10, survived. And the only reason that he survived is prior to the Nazis coming into his town, he had gone to a different town to help a Russian with whatever job that he was doing. So when my uncle was ready to come back, the Russians said, "Don't go." The Poles, the Germans were there. They killed out everybody. They wiped out the entire town. You have nothing to go back to. So at 14 years of age, he was inducted into the Russian army, fought with the Russians against the Germans. That's the one brother that survived out of 10. Now, the children. This is one of the most difficult things for me to talk about. I usually break down, but I'll try to be composed. They murdered 1.5 million children under the age of 15. So if you have siblings, if you have cousins, if you have friends, anybody who's 14 or younger would not have survived if they were Jewish. The reason? You weren't worth anything. Your life wasn't worth anything. You couldn't build railroads. They immediately, as soon as they arrived in Auschwitz, they went to the gas chambers, and that was it. One person who I remember as a child, who knew my mother and some of the other people who survived, told a story which is pretty difficult, about as soon as they got off of the trains in Auschwitz, they were picked to the right, to the left, to the right, to the left. If there was anything wrong with you, if you were wearing glasses, if your teeth were crooked, it didn't matter, you were going to be killed. You weren't perfect in their estimation. So now they march the women with the children to the gas chambers. Everybody has to get naked. Now an 11 to 12-year-old boy, he understands what dying is. And he asks his mother, he said, "Is this going to hurt?" And knowing in her heart that her children are going to be murdered, she has to keep her composure and say to them, "No, my child, it won't hurt. We'll be together forever." $1.5 million children. I still cry about Sandy Hook, where they killed 26. Uvalde, when they killed 20 children. And just last week, at the church, when they killed 3. How do you relate to 1.5 million children being murdered? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my story. And thank you very much for listening.
questions from the audience now. Jess is going to help moderate it from that side. So if you just can ask your question into the microphone, and then Nina will answer it over here. So if you do have a question, raise your hand. We'll try to get to as many people as we can.
Hello, thank you so much for sharing your very touching story. It really touched our souls, and we are deeply sorry because whatever you have experienced, we are with you with all our hearts. So my question is, as a survivor, when you talk about these experiences, or you read a book, or you see a documentary, or you watch a movie just related to this experience, which one can really represent this experience better? So for us who have never been in that situation on those days, you believe which of these mediums are better to represent what happened during those very dark period?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question though.
So watching a movie
Yes.
or reading a text, which one could be a better representer of Holocaust experience? So you believe we should show more documentaries, movies, interviews, or we should read books to our students in order to glorify the memory of Holocaust? Which one works better in your opinion?
Well, I think that visual makes a big impression. When you see, and it's not just something that you're reading or hearing, which is helpful, but I always think when you see something, it sticks with you longer.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was very moving. Could you tell us how your mom survived? You said she came back.
Oh, how
from-
my mother survived?
Yes,
I left out that part, right?
yes.
So, they were marching, thousands of people in the dead of winter on a death march. That meant my mother, my grandmother, my uncle, and my aunt. And so, as I said, my uncle had prearranged with another family, and they escaped the march, and they went to a farm, and they were hidden also under the root cellar. And one day, a jeep with two German soldiers and a German shepherd was coming up the hill, and my mother gave the warning, and they ran down and they hid, and the farmer was very clever, because had they come into the house with the dog would have detected them. So he walked out to the road with wine and cheese and bread and gave it to them, and it satisfied them. They never came into the house, and that's how they survived. They were never in a concentration camp.
What year were you born?
1942. I just turned 81, April 5th.
We have a question from our viewers on the internet. So the first one is, do you ever reconnect with a Polish family that took you in?
Oh, so after we came to the United States, I was a kid. So I was enrolled in school. Of course, I didn't know what anybody was talking about because we didn't speak English. At 7, I spoke 3 languages fluently: Polish, German, and Yiddish. Nobody spoke those languages in school. And I sort of, as a kid, I got settled into my life in America, but I would always ask my mother, about Yannick, and she wanted me to emotionally continue to distance myself. When we were leaving Poland to go to Germany, Yannick asked my mother if he could please come and say goodbye to me. And I hadn't seen him for many months. And that was it was very horrific, because when I saw him and he saw me, the connection that he and I had, and he picked me up in his arms and the tears were flowing from his face and from mine, and our tears intermingled, and I begged him, Yannick, take me, take me, take me, but that was goodbye, and then we went to Germany. And then, as I said, in America, you know, as a child, I got immersed in childhood things. But my uncle, who went to Australia after the war, had always taken care of the Polish families that saved us. Every single month, he sent a care package to Poland to each one of the families. And one day, my uncle writes a letter to my mother. Now, mind you, this is like I was 14 years old by now. I can't do the math in my head. Who's a math student here? One day, my uncle would write a letter to my mother once a month. It was like a diary of everything that transpired in Australia. And in the letter, he writes that he would like to connect with Nina. So my mother reads the letter. We always read the letter about 3, 4, 5 times. So my mother asked me if I wanted, and I wanted. I almost jumped out of the building. That's how much I wanted to connect with him. But I no longer speak Polish, and I certainly can't read or write in Polish. But I told my mother to write back, and she did. And now the letters started to come. It was 1956. I did the math. It was 1956, and I still have the original envelope that he sent with the letter. I have everything that he sent to me. But one day I'm sitting and I'm talking to my mother, and as a child you don't talk about yourself because their experiences were so tragic that what I went through as a child paled by comparison. But one day I'm sitting and talking to my mother, talking dreams. I say to her, every single night I have the same dream, every single night. She said, well, what's your dream? I see a very, very black place. I see a little doll on a cot, jumping up and down and screaming, screaming, screaming. And my mother said to me, you're dreaming about yourself and what happened to you. From that day forward, I never dreamt it. But did I just get sidetracked? Somebody bring me back. That's your job. I can't remember everything.
I can ask another question that they're asking me through the WebEx. When you said that people were killed, if they went back home in Germany,
Yes.
can you explain who were the people that killed them and do you know why they
Yes.
killed them? You explained a little bit, but if you
It wasn't just the Germans, it was whatever country they came from. If they went back to Poland, if they went back to Greece, if they went back to France, the people who took over their homes and their possessions didn't want them to come back, so they killed them. But it was okay to kill Jewish people. You didn't get arrested. So this is after the war, 1945, 46, 47. And it was still going on.
Quick question. Since you experienced the hatred in Poland and experienced the hatred of Jews in Germany, do you see any parallels between Europe in the 1940s and America in 2023?
And America when?
Yeah.
And now?
Now.
In America now? Do I
Yes.
see parallels?
Parallels.
Well, the anti-Semitism is horrifying to me because I love America. This country gave me an opportunity to have a life, and I think I love it more than people who were born here because they don't know to prize it the way I did. But the anti-Semitism in this country right now is terrifying as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you so much for your story. I saw in 60 Minutes how they're videotaping Holocaust survivors, and they preserve their image using artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And I wonder if you were approached to do that so that your story will go on.
I was at the Holocaust Museum this past summer with my family, and prior to having a tour with a guide, I had to tell my story. So it is at the Washington Holocaust Museum. And then I have a computer that my children are begging me to write. And I don't even have to type. All I have to do is speak. And it's sitting for a year.
Yeah, I have a question.
Huh?
My question is, what helped you overcome like the pain and the trauma of those times? Like, be able to talk about it today.
I can't tell you that I've overcome it because it's part of my day-to-day life. And what I mean by that is if I see something or hear something, I immediately make the association because I can't divest myself of it. It's my DNA. And I feel that it's not easy for me to speak. Actually, it's very difficult because it stirs up even more. But I'm not speaking for myself. I'm speaking for the 6 million voices that were destroyed.
Great, we're gonna take 2 more questions. We have time.
So I know that looking back on the Holocaust, a lot of people, I know looking back on the Holocaust, a lot of people place varying levels of blame on bystanders or people that were complicit to like the events happening to their Jewish neighbors right next door.
I'm sorry,
And-
but I'm not hearing clearly. I apologize.
Alright, sorry, it's fine, I'll please. So looking back,
Maybe if you
yeah.
stand up, I could hear you better.
yeah, so looking
Why
back,
don't you come up here, we'll have a talk. I love this. I love connecting. Come here. You're about the same age as my grandson. He's 18. He's going to Bentley next year. Okay. Hi, honey.
so my question is that looking back, I know a lot of people place different levels of blame on the non-Jewish bystanders and people that were complicit to things that are happening right next door.
Yeah.
And do you hold those people out? Like, I know my parents, or my father specifically, holds those people almost as responsible, if not more responsible, than the perpetrators themselves.
So you're talking about the collaborators?
Yes, or not necessarily the collaborators, but the people that just did nothing and just sat and watched. And do you hold them responsible, or what are your sentiments towards them? I guess.
I don't feel that I can hold them responsible if they did nothing. They were probably in fear and terrorized themselves, so I can't really hold them responsible. And you have to understand that I have to walk right on 2 sides of this. I was saved because of Polish people. I wouldn't be here. My family wouldn't be here. My surviving family would not be here were it not for good Polish people like the ones that took us in. But then you have those that stood in their doors and pointed. And then you have people, like you say, that did nothing. I can't condemn them, and I don't. Thank you.
I can ask the last question if nobody else has any questions. I wanted to ask you, seeing all the anti-Semitism today, what do you feel like students, parents, grandparents, who grew up here, what do you feel like they should do when, talking to a Holocaust survivor, when, teaching about the Holocaust in schools? What do you feel like should be done in terms of teaching about the Holocaust so that way we make sure something like that doesn't happen again?
Well, I have an article that Joe Biden had written many years ago, and he said that Jews are not even safe in America. Now, I'm going back before he was vice president. Maybe I should have brought it, given you the date, but you could probably look it up. And I think that parents have to tell them the importance of being Jewish, to be proud of who you are. You have every reason to be proud of who you are. And that's all you can do is talk to your children. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nina, so much for sharing your story. It was really meaningful to me, and I really hope it meant something to all of you as well. We're going to have a quick break for 20 minutes, and then, Nina will be around to answer any more questions. We have food in the lounge.
Oh, food.
Yeah. And then we'll come back at around, I'd say, 5:35 to continue. We will have virtual remarks from Attorney General Tong and our panelists. Oh, okay. So we're ready to begin with our second half of our program. I'm going to play a video that Attorney General Tong sent in. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to be here personally, but this is a video that he filmed while visiting the concentration camps earlier in March.
By visiting Birkenau, which is where we are now, and we started this morning. Hi, it's Attorney General William Tong. I'm here with my Solicitor General, Josh Perry. We're marking our Holocaust remembrance this year, 2023, by visiting Birkenau, which is where we are now, and we started this morning at Auschwitz. And Josh, I think I started this morning thinking that I would get a greater understanding of the Holocaust, but I think walking through these two death camps, concentration camps, you really get how incomprehensible it is. You only begin to understand the level of death and human suffering when you hear about and see the evidence of the people. We saw hair braids that were cut off, mounds of hair and shoes and bowls that people used, and also, I think in many places, sometimes you see some beauty in other historical sites, and I think much of what we saw was just empty and old, and you felt there was really great evil in this place. You don't take anything away from it. And let me say, keep that fact.
So, thank you to Attorney General Tong for sending in that video. I think it's very meaningful, even though he couldn't be here in person, to kind of share that he was able to visit the concentration camps, and I really appreciate him sending this in and sending his remarks. And now I would like to introduce our panel. So we have our moderator, Jake, who works with the Connecticut Anti-Defamation League. We also have Michael Bloom, who works for the Jewish Federation Association. Am I getting that? Association of Connecticut, that's a long name. And then virtually we have Julia Jassy, who is the CEO of Jewish on Campus. We have Rachel Sassine, who works for Hillel International. And Lacey, I always have a hard time pronouncing last names, Shoah. I tried my best. She works for the USC Shoah Foundation. So I will let Jake take it away, and they will introduce themselves, and our panelists can unmute themselves when they feel like talking. So yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear us all right? All right. So my name is Jake Joseph. I'm Connecticut's Associate Director for the ADL, or the Anti-Defamation League. And it is an honor, truly an honor, to be here, especially after Nina Jacobs spoke about your personal experience and story. Thank you so much again from all of us for speaking with us this evening. I also want to say, speaking with my colleagues in other regions of ADL about what they were doing to commemorate this evening, they all said they were maybe going to city halls or to different politician spaces. But I said, oh no, UConn got to us first here in Connecticut. It's a great honor to be here in an education space, an event organized and led by students. Yana and your colleagues have been truly incredible to work with. I think you first asked us in January if we were available, so truly proactive and visionary. So from all of us, at least at ADL, thank you. Again, my name is Jake, and I'll kind of do my personal intro at the end, which I think is most appropriate for a moderator. So going on to maybe starting with our virtual panelists, and start at the top and go counterclockwise. Julie.
Hi, it's a pleasure to speak with you all today. Thank you so much to all of the incredible students at the University of Connecticut for putting this together. It's really an honor to be here, and thank you to Nina for sharing your story. I was definitely crying from this side of the screen listening to it, so thank you so much for sharing that. It was really meaningful to hear that. I am also a student at the University of Chicago. I just submitted my thesis 2 days ago, so I soon will be a graduate, but I'm a student like the rest of you guys listening. And I was inspired during my time on campus to create an organization now called Jewish on Campus, working to amplify Jewish student voices in the fight against anti-Semitism. I mean, unfortunately, we are the experts on campus anti-Semitism because we're the ones that are living through it. So if we're able to have a platform to share our stories, uplift each other's voices, and create positive, meaningful change. That's what we're here to do, and that's what we've been doing. And so it's really an honor to be a part of this panel here today, and to speak with you all, and I look forward to speaking with my fellow panelists.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Rachel Sastine, and I have the pleasure of working at Hillel International on a team that is called the Israel Action and Addressing Anti-Semitism team. So we have the honor of working with all 200 plus Hillels across the country on both programming and issues or crises that relate to both Israel and anti-Semitism. We know that sometimes those things overlap and it's complicated, sometimes they're separate, but we like to be able to help campuses navigate those waters and put on educational programming to address these issues on campus. I came to this work after 5 years ago, graduating from the University of Texas, where I experienced the most vibrant Jewish life that I had no idea existed, and wanted to be able to provide that opportunity for students across the country, and knowing that there are barriers to getting involved in Jewish life and wanting to make sure that is an easy process for them and feeling that they can express themselves and their Jewish identity fully and wholly in the way that feels best for them. Our team unfortunately deals with, like I said, the issues on campuses that are unfortunately growing ever more. And we address it in a multitude of ways that we can get into as our panel goes on. And it's an honor to be here and support one of UConn, which is one of the 55 campuses that I work with. Go Huskies, and I'm happy to be here.
Hey everyone, can you all hear me? Yeah, okay, great. Yes, also, thank you. I'm very honored to be here to commemorate and converse and learn from you all. My name is Dr. Lacey Showaker. Lacey, please. I am the Program and Development Lead for University Level Education at USC Shoah Foundation. We are an educational nonprofit based at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles that houses over 55,000 genocide survivor and witness testimonies, the majority of which are from the Holocaust and World War II. Our mission with those testimonies is to develop empathy, understanding, and respect. I care deeply about that mission and also have a background in testimony research, which is why I work with them, why I'm lucky enough to be here with you. I was going to give just a little background about the foundation. It started in 1993 with Steven Spielberg, who was filming Schindler's List outside Auschwitz, consulting survivors, and realized the urgent need to collect as many of their testimonies as possible. And so from the mid-90s to early aughts, we achieved our initial goal of collecting over 50,000 Holocaust survivor testimonies. And in 2013, we expanded our archive to include testimonies from other genocidal events, such as Armenian genocide, genocide against the Tutsi of Rwanda, Anjing massacre, etc. And in 2015, we created our first testimony collection that deals with a global issue that is contemporary anti-Semitism, as opposed to a more singular event. And we are still collecting Holocaust survivor testimony. That continues to be a priority for us. In addition to collecting the testimonies, we're really adamant about sharing them and preserving them into perpetuity. So we have multiple platforms. One is the Visual History Archive. That is where we have digitized and indexed all of our testimonies to the minute so that people can search them, access them. We also have a online educational platform called Eyewitness that includes curated testimonies, clips, as well as ready-made, standard-based lessons for the classroom. And then I'll just say we now have multiple types of testimony. So we have our Dimensions in Testimony series, which is the interactive testimonies that I'm sure I'll talk more about later. We also have a virtual reality film called The Last Goodbye, in which a survivor returns to Auschwitz and recounts his experiences. But in my role, I work with students and faculty, supporting them and engaging with our archive in meaningful ways.
Is this thing on? There we go. Good afternoon. Thank you, UConn, Hillel. Thank you, Adina.
for the invitation to speak here today. My name is Michael Bloom. I'm the Executive Director of the Jewish Federation Association of Connecticut. We are an advocacy organization. We lobby city, state, and federal officials on issues of importance to the 7 Jewish federations and their Jewish beneficiary agencies across the state. I've been in this role for 6 years. I've been in government my entire life. I've worked for state legislators. I've worked for lobbying firms. And I came to this job because I wanted to be, what better way to than to spend my day with my love of politics and love of government, and also advocacy on behalf of my community, the Jewish community. Everybody needs someone who is connected to government, whether it's a friend or someone who actually is in government. Someone needs in their lives a connector, and I wanted to be that connector for the Jewish community. I know this may, shock all of you, but government can be incredibly frustrating. And so I wanted to be that person for the Jewish community that can help navigate government, in this case on behalf of the Jewish community. JFAC has played a large role in passing Holocaust and genocide mandate in our public schools. We did that about 5 years ago. We helped create a state security grant program to help our houses of worship and our threatened Jewish nonprofits increase their security because of the rise in anti-Semitism and overall hate we are seeing in this country. And that's for all houses of worship, not just synagogues. And further along the lines of Holocaust education, we are currently advocating along with the ADL to help further implement the Holocaust and Genocide Mandate Bill and other mandates like African American, AAPI, Latinx, I shouldn't say Latinx, Latino. Further, additional curriculum coordinators at the state level to help teachers teach these tough subjects so that they are important to learn. Thank you.
And I'll be your moderator this evening. Again, my name is Jake Joseph. I'm Connecticut's Associate Director for ADL. I'll quickly just give you a little background on ADL before we launch into questions that have been curated by the students of Hillel for our wonderful panelists. The Anti-Defamation League was founded in 1913 with a 2-part mission. To end the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all. So we like to say we have no risk of missional drift with the second part of our mission, because that's a big task, to secure justice and fair treatment to all people. So that means, as the Associate Director for Connecticut, I'm kind of Connecticut's front line in responding to incidents of hate, bias, and extremism, and anti-Semitism through a multi-pronged approach. Often we get the chance to work with Hillel, to work with many of these organizations, to work with JFAC and Policy and others, but it's truly an honor to be here. Brought me to this work as I was 7 years actually as a Christian minister in a congregation. But I'm half Jewish from an interfaith family, and my half siblings are Jewish, and my nieces and nephews, and they were telling me about my niece was actually scared to join Hillel at a large Ivy League when she went to college, because she was scared she might be harassed. My brother talking about his experience dealing with anti-Zionism, and other stories that my family was telling me from my dad's side. And then in addition to that, we had a Zoom bombing at the congregation I was serving because I was an out gay minister, and the neo-Nazi group was targeting this Zoom bombing with anti-Semitic imagery and anti-LGBT content, right? I became aware of ADL, and they said, we would like you to come work for us and fight anti-Semitism full-time and the hate and bias that's rising in our state. And 2 years ago, I said yes, and it's been such a journey since. So with that in mind, that's the last about me you're going to hear this evening. The rest is about our lovely panelists. And we're going to begin with our important question. Our questions are broken down into kind of 3 categories, but I really hope that we actually end up leaving some good time for questions for those both online and in person, because conversation is really what's going to make this a dynamic conclusion to tonight's program. The first sort of category is thinking about Holocaust education. I know that we're still working on a curricular coordinator position to help us actually implement the work of Holocaust mandate in education. So I guess the question is at the college level or university level, and I guess we'll maybe start with Rachel with this question. What does Holocaust education look like on a college campus? And what do educators focus on when teaching the Holocaust to students? Or maybe what ought they focus on?
Sure. It's a great question, and I think I mentioned before, Hills are on 200 campuses across the country, serving over 500 campuses, so many of our Hillels are multi-campus Hillels. That being said, there is really not a uniform approach that we see campuses taking on this issue. Many of our campuses, best practices that I can outline are partnering with the academic departments on their campuses, be it Jewish studies, be it genocide, Holocaust studies, partnering with those institutions, getting those Hillel students to those events, co-sponsoring with the Hillel and vice versa. And a lot of our Hillel Holocaust education comes from Yom Shoah and events that are taking place across the country in our Hillels today. So be that hearing from survivors like Nina. Thank you so much for sharing your touching story of survival and your family's survival. And a few other institutions that Hillels like to partner with, Zikaron Besalon, this idea of bringing students together in salons or living rooms or close, comfortable spaces and in a storytelling, the way that Nina said she loves connection and loves kind of meeting people. We feel that when people can humanize a survivor and they're not just a number, and the examples that Nina gave, that's where we see the most, impactful learning from our students. So Yom HaShoah is really a big touch point for Hills and having programs across campuses. And partnering with other institutions, community events, synagogues, federation. Hillels are great places, obviously, when we want students in the room to kind of collaborate in that way like we're doing here tonight. But we really don't see a uniform approach to this issue on campuses like we might see in state and statewide initiatives on K through 12 education.
Also, maybe Lacey and Julia, you could both chime in as well on this one and kind of also go into more of a question of, given the education that we've seen that's already happened, why is anti-Semitism still on the rise on college campuses and elsewhere? So how do we correlate that?
I can start with kind of piggybacking on a lot of what Rachel was saying. So I'll just speak to how we at the USC Shoah Foundation do work specifically with testimony-based Holocaust and genocide education. And we do this not just at university level, actually kindergarten through university. And at all levels, our understanding of testimony, and I think, yes, we did see this evidence tonight with Nina's testimony, is that the purpose is really to humanize history, right? To bring it down to the individual experience so that listeners, learners can relate, right, on one-to-one level that's highly emotional and impactful, right? Studies show this again and again. So the professors that I work with at USC, as well as beyond other campuses, both nationally and globally, are really interested in bringing in testimony to complement what other resources they're bringing in, like films and books, et cetera, to bring in detailed firsthand accounts, right, of events and experiences, including anti-Semitism, right? And so they'll bring in clips about Kristallnacht, Nuremberg laws, specific concentration camp, moment of liberation, right, et cetera. And in addition, right, professors are really big on having students engage with the whole testimony, not just a clip. So in that case, they want to be able to learn how to access and navigate our archives as well as other archives, right? So that also students can do their own research, right, and pursue their individual interests. And this is where I'll just mention our Dimensions of Testimony interactive biographies a little bit more. So this is and I think somebody in the audience also kind of referenced it earlier. So this type of testimony is interactive in the sense that you can pose a question to the survivor, and through natural language processing, which I don't fully understand, but it'll give you a real-time response. So it'll actually pull up the video from the testimony that should answer your question. So if you ask Eva Kor, for example, what was Auschwitz like, she'll give you a detailed answer of what she saw and smelled and felt, and how she was spared from immediate death by being pulled into Dr. Joseph Mengele's twin experiments, right? So this isn't by no means meant to replace, right, what we saw as being the irreplaceable, invaluable experience of hearing a living survivor tell their story, right? But it is a learner-led, curiosity-based experience of learning that we find really resonates with university students especially. And then maybe I'll stop and then we can come back to the other question a bit, just with Julia.
Yeah, sure. Lacey is definitely the expert on the testimony piece, and I think that the preservation of testimony is so important. I'm sure all of us in this room have had a moment when we realized we are the last generation that's able to hear witness testimony. And I've been to a Zero and Salon testimony one time, and the survivor basically said that once we have the opportunity to hear testimony, we then become the witness. And I think that that's a really powerful privilege and a really powerful position to understand. Specifically, touching on the last piece of the question that you asked about, if we're having this increase in Holocaust education, how is anti-Semitism still growing today? And I think it gets down to the root of what we're learning about when it comes to the Holocaust. So we have to learn about what happened. And we have to learn about what happened before the Holocaust that allowed for the violently anti-Semitic rhetoric that was pushed by the Nazi Party to gain traction. Because if you think about this, what ended up in a large-scale mass genocide of Jewish people and of other minority groups across Europe didn't happen because Hitler came to Germany one day and convinced all of Germany to be anti-Semitic. It was because there were thousands of years of history of time when anti-Semitism was so ingrained in society that Hitler was able to play upon that, and the Nazi Party was able to touch upon that and use the fear and use the conspiracy that was so embedded within society to spark what ended up becoming the Holocaust. And when we understand it from that perspective, and not that the Nazi Party themselves were the ones that created anti-Semitism, but they're the ones that used it, we're then able to understand today how within the fabric of our society still there is latent anti-Semitism, and that those who spread it today are often buying into a really good resource on this, Deborah Lipstadt. She speaks about this a lot, conspiracy, and how it's kind of at the helm of what the ability for anti-Semitism to spread today is. The belief of disproportionate power and the belief of whatever people want to scapegoat the Jews for. And I think, to kind of draw that back into the modern context where a lot of my work comes in, is understanding how that is still latent in society and using the understanding of that to better understand the Holocaust and what predated it and what has continued since then.
So I will add that, in my opinion, Holocaust education on college campuses is incredibly important. Well, to a certain degree, more important than your first and second, your learning in K through 12, because for those of you who may be your next teachers, what are you learning now? Because you're going to turn around and teach this potentially for the next 5, 10, 20, 25 years, and you're going to have an effect on potentially thousands of kids throughout your career. So Holocaust education in college, it does vary. Every university is different. I know we've had my organization and some other advocates from Holocaust organizations have had discussions with state universities. Because again, if you typically go to a state university like whether it's UConn or Central or Southern, 85% of those students stay in Connecticut. And so it's really important what they're learning, and every college campus is different. UConn has an anti-Semitism class, right? That's amazing, right? I don't know. We started to have some conversation with some of the state universities about what they offer, but we have a lot more work to do with regards to that. But it's really important.
I want to circle back to Lacey. I thought you had a follow-up to the first question, right?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say about, why answering the question of, or we're touching on it about why anti-Semitism is so persistent and pervasive, right? I think, this isn't my field of expertise, but I do work for the USC Shoah Foundation. Our executive director, Rob Williams, is an expert in anti-Semitism, has a 40-chapter book, or is editing a 40-chapter book coming out on it, so please consult that for a fuller answer. But what I see, especially in my work on campuses, is an inability to recognize it in the first place, right? So I think going back to what Julia was saying, right? Teaching about the myths, the lies, the conspiracy theories that have endured and morphed over time, right? And then so that students can first of all recognize it when it's both explicit and implicit, right? And then have a variety of tool sets to be able to respond to it, right? And we're still, you know, we often direct them to testimony. We at the USC Shoah Foundation does lead an initiative called Stronger Than Hate, where we are training students, specifically student leaders, in how to recognize and respond to anti-Semitism. And this also has the broader goal of ethical leadership, so it also involves discussions about values, right? And we also use survivor testimony for that. So yeah, just you know, getting more the root of the issue is, one of the roots is ignorance, right? And so getting the education out, you know, in the classroom, but also beyond it as well. A lot of our programming actually happens outside of the classroom too.
One of the things we do in ADL in Connecticut is a lot of incident response. And so how have you, the four of you are practitioners in this area, in policy and in campus life and application of these curricula. How have you seen Holocaust education or anti-Semitism education effectively change minds and belief systems in response to incidents? Do you have an example from a campus or a community you've worked with?
Sure, I can start. So the Hillel International and ADL nationally have partnered on an incredible video series. It's our anti-Semitism education curriculum. It's a 3-part video series totaling about 45 minutes or so to an hour. It's kind of a heavy lift to get students, unfortunately, to sit for that long, but we usually break it up over sessions. And we've seen incredible results across different types of communities. So of course we are showing this within our Hillels. We'll have either Hillel staff or myself come out and do this with the staff themselves or Jewish student leaders to give Jewish students a language around this. And sometimes it's kind of hard to, maybe you feel too personal or you think you're gaslighting yourself, you're saying, well, I'm crazy, but when they can see this codified into, you know, thousands of years of history and really great content in this video series, gives them the language and the agency to say, oh, this has happened to me. This happened to me in my grade school, in my elementary school, throughout college, whatever. And I had no idea that this was, you know, a phenomenon that Jews around the world are experiencing. So we want to make sure that Jewish students themselves feel like they have the ability to speak up and not downplaying the anti-Semitism that they've experienced. Secondly, we do this with non-Jewish students, so in a student union, in a cross-cultural event like over dinner with the Indian Student Association, and help build bridges. And the curriculum really is able to be used as an identity piece, so it's not just a lecture about the Jews and what we've gone through, but it's also interactive and saying, well, what would it be like to hide a piece of my identity, and what would it be like to be associated with a country that I've only visited and somehow I'm held responsible for their actions. And it does cover the kind of nuance of today's anti-Semitism, which I know we'll get to, of when Israel can kind of creep in and the anti-Zionism and anti-Israel sentiment that can be anti-Semitic. And lastly, we do this curriculum for administrators. And so making sure that they understand their responsibility and what they owe Jewish students as a minority on their campuses to speak up for them, to make sure they are safeguarded rights as minorities. A lot of Jewish communities across the country are not considered official minorities on their campuses because for some reason they don't see Jews that way, and therein lies the opportunity for our education for them to be able to say, oh, I had no idea this was more than a religion. And so that curriculum we've seen, I've run for example in Texas for administrators when there was a particularly bad student chapter of Palestinian students who wanted to speak for justice for Palestinians in Israel, but unfortunately had some anti-Semitic language and images and posters that crept into their activism. And so initially when a campus, when a health professional reported these posters, on the ground, they said, okay, great, did you file a bias report? Like they couldn't see the idea that a swastika on a poster as a dot above an I, using a swastika like as a flourish, they didn't understand that was problematic. And so 3 trips to Texas later, they then issued an apology to the Jewish students, have met with that other chapter of students to kind of understand, oh, we want to support your free speech, but we also want to, draw the line when it comes to the campus code of conduct and respect for the students. So that's just one small example of how we know that this education is working when it's in front of audiences who don't have any ill intent, but are unfortunately just ignorant.
Yeah, I can speak to this as well. I guess I can sort of tell you a little bit about my own experience, because this is something that, as a student myself, I've lived through over the past 4 years and know, unfortunately, all too well. So, my first year at the University of Chicago, I was looking for clubs to join, and I decided to join the French club. And I don't speak French, but I thought it was fun. They had free food, they had the guests, so as a college student, you're in right away. And so I joined the French club, and I heard, there was dialogue one day in French, and I heard the word Nazi. And I was a brand new freshman on campus, and I interrupted the conversation in English, and I asked why they were talking about Nazis. And there was a student there from Germany who responded to me, and he said, back home in Germany, we don't say that. Sorry, to caveat in the story, I explained that my father's family, a lot of my father's family had perished in the Holocaust, and that, I wanted to know why they were talking about Nazis. And the German student responded and said, back home in Germany, we don't say that your family died in the Holocaust. So they took an extended vacation to Germany and never came home. And so we can all hear that story and know that was anti-Semitic. But when I was a freshman on campus, I'd never had an experience like that before. So I was really quiet in response. Everyone else in the room was uncomfortable and kind of laughing. I was uncomfortable and kind of laughing along, so didn't know what else to do. I called my mom later, and she was able to say that was anti-Semitism, but I didn't feel confident enough to call it that. And I realized my freshman year that so many of my peers were having similar experiences, where we would experience something anti-Semitic, but we thought we were the only ones. And we felt like we couldn't share our stories. We couldn't call out anti-Semitism because I think Rachel used a good word there, gaslighting. You kind of like gaslight yourself into saying, no, that can't really be it. I must be overreacting. I'm making too big of a deal out of this. Jewish on Campus originally started as was a platform for students to share their stories. The concept is really simple. If you're able to read other people experiencing anti-Semitism like you can see, first of all, what anti-Semitism looks like if you're a non-Jew who's never experienced it. Second of all, if you're a Jewish person, that you're not alone in that experience. And third of all, you can create community and empowerment out of the living in a situation. What that's built into is a resource for students to navigate how to respond to anti-Semitism that's gone all the way up working with governments and all the way locally with administrators. For us, what we found to be the most powerful tool is peer education. So students being able to speak about their stories. Because a lot of us have had moments like that, for every student listening to this, had a moment where you feel like your story isn't enough to speak out. And if you're able to know that there are others too with the same experiences as you, you're so much less isolated and so much more motivated to do something about it. So for us, I guess my answer to the question is the power of stories and the power of peer education, which I'm sure Lacey can relate to the power of stories quite a bit.
So data is a huge part of this and is pretty untapped here in Connecticut. Did it move your thoughts? What did it change your behavior in 10th grade? Did it change in 11th? Here for data on to teachers and for students. How are they teaching it? What are their obstacles? What piece, what else do you need from us? And then again, from students. Did it move you? It's untapped. We're trying to change that here in Connecticut. I know the federal government is also trying to get into data as well. We can get into the HEAL Act in a minute, but it's unknown. I mean, we know anecdotally it does. We've seen stories that, you know, hearing from Holocaust survivors does move people and does move the needle, but more information is needed.
So I'm going to kind of combine the last several comments into a question for Lacey that is also based on, I think Julia was kind of implying that, Lacey, you have a lot of experience in the impact of storytelling in communities. And one of the questions we have from the students from Hillel here at UConn is how non-Jewish organizations and students can aid in fighting anti-Semitism on college campuses, and kind of going back to Julia's experience of all of the French club students looking around and sort of not knowing how to respond. Well, those were what we were talking about earlier. Those were bystanders, right? They didn't know how to become allies, as we call them, as somebody was targeted with anti-Semitism by a perpetrator of anti-Semitic comments. So this is all ADL vocabulary. All of our organizations might use different, slightly more nuanced vocabulary. But truly, that group of other students might not have been Jewish, but they should have still not waited for the only Jewish student in the room to respond to that, right? So turning or convincing people that being bystander, being quiet in response to anti-Semitism is not an acceptable response, but that becoming an ally is. So how can storytelling help? I guess this is for Lacey, and then we'll go to everyone else. This is a kind of interesting storytelling, sharing your story, your narrative, your own experience, and how to do that. But how can that help non-Jewish students learn how to be allies in the important fight against anti-Semitism today on campuses and in workplaces beyond?
Thank you, Jake. I think there's a lot of ways to answer that question, so I'll just start with one and then maybe we can circle back. But yeah, this idea of how is testimony and story a part of creating allyship and working against bystandership, right? I was talking before about learning how to recognize and respond to anti-Semitism, right? And our testimony-based Holocaust education resources do that. They also show that even though we think of anti-Semitism as a belief, right, a belief system, it is also a belief system with harmful, right, deadly consequences, right? So the testimony shows how these belief systems affect individuals, right, harm individuals, as well as groups. And they also, I mean, going back to the humanizing component, I wish we kind of went without saying, right? But they also function to humanize, right? To show that Jewish people are a vastly diverse, unique group of people, right? That would be initially what I would say about the power of testimony. And then I'll just say that in our work that we do for training students in how to recognize and respond to testimony, or anti-Semitism, excuse me, we of course share our resources, but then we also invite students to share what they think will be effective, right? And so it ends up being a conversation. And a lot of the conversations do turn to the power, the need, right? But also the challenge of telling their own stories, right? And so then we bring in our work to talk about kind of the ethics of collecting testimony and how to do it in a careful way, right? That honors the, I think as Nina was speaking to as well, the real difficulty of sharing your story, especially with wider audiences, right? So how do we not just tell our stories in a way that protects the survivors, makes them feel safe, amplifies their voices, right? Make sure that their message is true, right, to what is heard in the way that they would like for it to be heard. So then that leads into then ethical listening, right? And so students are really, in my experience, keen to learn, have discussions about ethical storytelling, ethical listening, and then how to use storytelling and listening to then facilitate respectful dialogue about not just anti-Semitism, but other issues of identity-based hate.
Michelle?
Yeah, thinking of like a wheelhouse of different campuses and instances, but I was facilitating our training in Boca Raton last semester, and I think most of us will remember the incidents with Kanye West and his massive meltdown, mental health issues that included some abhorrent anti-Semitic remarks. And the Jewish community in Boca Raton and FAU, I know that was a Final Four rivalry, but FIU's Hillel engages a lot of non-Jewish students and does really great work with minorities and just humanizing Jewish experiences, inviting them in to celebrate Shabbat, to do the Yamim, Yom Ha'atzmaut. We had a massive Israel Fest the other day on campus. And there were students in the room where I was facilitating this curriculum in response to the comments that Kanye was making. And a non-Jewish student broke down in tears during the presentation and conversation, because she just had not heard these stories from her Jewish peers, people that she interacted with, in the Hillel, and they had great times together, but maybe, anti-Semitism wasn't something they were talking about regularly. And she just had no idea of what, the throwing of pennies, these stories that we're kind of desensitized to, I think, when we're maybe in Jewish spaces, and we hear about, the stereotypes and the jokes that people make, but to hear them from the first time and to see that through her eyes as the presenter, I just, brought me back to this work in full, like really feeling all of that and all of the kind of trauma that students can be carrying around. And so just in the act of breaking stereotypes and understanding that, Jews look all different types of ways and colors and ethnicities, hearing that a lot of our content focused on Jews, from Morocco, from Ethiopia, like the content of that Jews of color have existed for thousands of years. Like all of this is kind of mind-blowing to non-Jewish peers who just, like I said, have no ill intent. It's just they don't know. It's a lack of knowledge. Maybe they haven't met Jewish students before. And so just by breaking the stereotype, I think, and doing the learning and engaging at a personal level, can really help students build that community and allyship, and then have other people in turn be able to step up for them and be able to recognize those kind of microaggressions that we feel silly maybe saying, hey, like I don't love Holocaust jokes, but when other people can also do that with us, it empowers us even more to say, you know what, like no, that is the base of the pyramid of hate. I love using the ADL pyramid of hate in my work. That's the bottom. That's where all of this starts. Those kind of small instances that trickle up. That Julia mentioned, that this has been going on for thousands of years before the Holocaust. This isn't new, and that's where it starts, and that's where we can kind of nip it in the butt before it goes further.
I take this a little bit of a different take, as if stuff really goes, one of the ways to build bridges with other communities, non-Jewish, are if stuff really goes bad in this country, which let me say, I don't think it will, but if stuff does, if it did, Jews aren't going to be the only one affected. It's not going to end with the Jews. Some of the flyers that, in the Holocaust, right, Jews weren't the only ones killed. I don't think it would end here with only the Jews. And I hope that would open up other communities' eyes. That it's not just going to be us that gets singled out. Some of the flyers that the ADL sees across Connecticut are not just anti-Jewish, they're anti-black as well. I mean, there's constantly, all over this country, you're seeing anti-black, you're seeing racism, you're seeing racist, symbols on wall, next to swastikas. It's not just going to affect the Jews. And I hope that would open up people's eyes.
So last week, pretty much every day we had an incident of either graffiti or flyering in a community here in Connecticut. Connecticut's not unique in that way. And so it hasn't been on college campuses because these folks know it's private property and they don't want to get in trouble that way. They put them on public streets. So that's why you don't usually see flyerings of campuses. But in Connecticut, our most active group is the National Socialist Club. Anyone know what that is in German? Nazi, right? But people see this National Socialist Club and it's on their front porch, and the pamphlets are usually the same, and they target, they're anti-LGBT, they're incredibly racist towards many, many groups, and they're also very explicitly anti-Semitic. So we see these across Connecticut and other neighboring states, and so just know, but on the other side, communities respond robustly. And creatively and aggressively. So just kind of lift that other side up too, that like, yes, we're seeing the flyerings and they're around, but that news, the news doesn't end with the story. The community also responds. We have a lot of allies here. So I just like to always name the ADL, we don't always say the other side, but it's important.
Correct. We are lucky in Connecticut. We live in a very welcoming state for the Jewish community, and frankly, for many communities. We're in a bubble here. There are still 2 states that don't even have hate crime laws. So we have elected leaders from the city, state, and federal level who are supportive of many of the issues facing the Jewish community, additional Holocaust education, money for securing our buildings. We live in a good place. I mean, really. I mean, Connecticut. We should not lose the fact that we have elected leaders who will speak out when an incident happens in their community. We are fortunate here.
I'm going to take a moderator privilege and change order just a little bit to keep you all awake. We have another segment of pre-planned questions, which we're going to come back to. But let's take a minute and check in on audience questions from the Zoom or in person, and then we'll come back to pre-planned, just to keep you all on your toes and at least awake for a minute. And then the first question will go to Julia, since I think you're next in line in order. Does it sound good? So whoever asks the question, just know Julia will be the first to answer it, and we'll go from there. Any questions so far? Okay, we'll be in back here. Great, thank you.
My question is,
That's okay. You got it.
my question is, what was the first event that really got you into not being out there and more like active in your community? Like, what was that other than because I did hear your freshman year experience. What, as you got older, what changed your mindset to the point where it was like, I have to do something and I have to go out and help?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That freshman year experience was definitely the first one, but it wasn't really what happened. It was my reaction to it, and it was the fact that I didn't know what to say, and I didn't know how to respond. And it was a mix between a lot of experiences like that, seeing that growing online, and also, I mean, I come from a really interesting Jewish family background. My father's family is what you would think of as like a standard American Jew, whatever that means. It's not really a real thing, but what you can imagine. Kind of like Ashkenazi Jewish from Romania and Poland. My mother's family, Spartacus Rashbi from Iraq, Yemen, and Spain, all came as refugees to Israel. And I found myself really often not saying where my grandparents were from, because I just didn't want to have to defend something that was just a part of who I was. And I hated the feeling of never really knowing how to respond whenever I felt that uncomfortable feeling that every Jewish person knows when you see something that feels anti-Semitic. But I didn't really have the tools. I grew up on Long Island, New York, which is like Connecticut, but in New York. I always joke that like saying you're from Long Island, if you say you're Jewish from Long Island, it's like saying you play soccer. What else is different about you? I mean, I joke too many times, but like there's nothing. When you're growing up, you're so. I went to public school. It was an area that really enforced the idea of assimilating, the idea of never really talking about where your family is from, what's different about your heritage. And because of that, I went into college totally unprepared. So I guess the answer to your question is, it wasn't just the anti-Semitic incidences, because the German comment was definitely a big one for me, and a couple of other ones like that. And the overall experience, not really saying where my grandparents are from, was probably the 2 biggest things. But for me, it really wasn't what happened, but it was my reaction to it. And it was the feeling that I wasn't going to call it out. And then what changed for me is I saw the pandemic started, I went home, and we were all isolated, and I was looking for community online for the first time. I really wanted to get involved in Jewish community, and I saw other people my age talking about their own experiences, both against anti-Semitism, but also as Sephardic Jews. And so for me, that was something that was really moving, knowing that I first of all can be proud, and second of all can be vocal. And I think that's what really inspired the idea behind JOC, which is that if we're all able to be vocally proud, and vocally open about our stories, then we can motivate the rest of our community to be the same. Hopefully that answers your question.
Let's actually have all the panelists answer this question if we have time. It's a really good one. answer yet. So we're gonna go with either Lacey next. How about no? We'll finish.
Yeah, so if I remember the question correctly, it's how did you get involved in this work? What sort of personal experience brought you to it? Is that, I think that's, so yeah, my background is slightly different. I'm not Jewish. I grew up in Arizona and was really surrounded by anti-immigrant hate. And I think that explains my interest in Spanish and Latin American studies, which I pursued through graduate school. And so as part of that, I started learning more about the Guatemalan genocide and specifically the power of testimony in that context, right? Both in terms of forming community, but also being used as evidence in court cases, et cetera. And I was, and that led me actually to working with USC Shoah Foundation, initially as a student. I was working specifically with our Guatemalan genocide archive to study the ways that survivors recounted their experience, and also kind of how they understood the power of their own testimony. So I really come to this work as a listener, right? And trying my best, right, to be a listener that is educated and can help amplify the voices of others.
We're gonna skip Michael. Rachel?
Sure. I think I can think of a few things. I grew up outside of Houston, Texas, and very Bible Belt suburb of Houston, and a lot of students. Never met someone Jewish before, and just like incidences on the playground, incidences in high school of just comments. Are you related to Albert Einstein? You're gonna go to hell. This is my Jewish friend. Are kind of like a cycle of things that I would hear from time to time. And I became really sassy and outspoken about my identity. Didn't want to take any prisoners and told people Santa Claus wasn't real and did, all the kind of things you did as a kid in that situation. And getting to the University of Texas, like I said, I experienced such vibrant Jewish life, including Hanukkah Diwali dinner, which my mother is Indian, and so that fusion of those identities was like, oh my God, that event was started by someone else, but it was perfectly fit to my identity. That was like a euphoric sort of feeling at Hillel. What kind of made me really want to do this work was I was living in Israel and had already been applying to Jewish jobs, and I was home in my apartment in Israel when I heard about the Tree of Life shooting. And it was such a juxtaposition of I'm in Israel hearing about a terror attack, an anti-Semitic attack in America, whereas I had been in that situation multiple times of hearing about terror attacks in Israel and waking up to that news in America, but going to sleep knowing that there's my Jewish community was suffering in America, was a massive wake-up call, and that sort of led me to do this work specifically with Israel and anti-Semitism, and just really wanting to make sure that students had no barriers to entry and felt safe and affirmed in their Jewish identity.
Thinking about it, I didn't, luckily grew up, didn't face any anti-Semitism in school or here at UConn. What I think what motivated me was when I came into this job 6 years ago, I was motivated by what our organization could do that hadn't been done previously. While working in the Legislative Office building in Hartford, it is the most amazing building in the world. It can also be the most frustrating, painful building in the world. But on the good side, you can think of an idea and you can actually 6 months later turn it into law. And when I came into this job, Holocaust and genocide education, they had tried for several years to get it passed, and they weren't able to do it. So that was first day motivation of we're gonna make this happen, and we did. And so I'm constantly motivated by what else can we do in this state. As I was saying, not every state has hate crime laws. We have some of the strongest in the country, and we played a small role in that. ADL played a big role in that. The state security grant program, you know, the state of Connecticut gives money for threatened houses of worship and nonprofits. There's only like 6 or 7 states that do that. It's a really big deal what we can do here and what we can think of. So that's the motive. What can we do next for the community to better our community, other communities in the state of Connecticut?
So this is sort of for all of you a question that is, I'm kind of going to take several of the questions that were here in the conclusion and put them together, but you know, a lot of the incidents we get in through ADL are K-12 school-based, and these are places where we know, in Connecticut at least, Holocaust education is mandated, but this is a really great question. I'm going to read it. There are many resources available for teachers. However, the issue is there are so many resources, and we hear that teachers need specific resources. Given how tough this topic is to teach in a hyper-politicized environment, with books being banned and teachers being scared, what kind of resources are available to teachers and educators so they can effectively teach about the Holocaust in school?
So I can start with this one. I think the problem is there's actually, for Holocaust, there's almost too many resources. Teachers, we've heard from teachers. We were a professor at Central Connecticut State University did a survey, got 100 responses from teachers, and they said a couple things. One is we need specific resources, curriculum on the Holocaust. My organization and advocates like Alan in the front row and other organizations, Voices of Hope, ADL, actually put together a website for the state of Connecticut. And there's dozens of resources from Shoah Foundation, from many organizations. I think the problem is they need some direction. It's almost too much to deal with. And they also, the teachers said in the survey, they don't have resources, specific curriculum on other genocides, whether it's Rwanda or the Rohingya. So teachers need help, but I think that there's almost too many resources out there, which is why we're trying to get a state curriculum coordinator, which can go to teachers in New Britain, Tallinn, Coventry, and say, okay, if you have an hour, this is what you should teach. If you have 2 hours, this is what you should teach, and help walk them through this.
I've heard of educators having peer learning groups where they can share best resources. Does Connecticut encourage that for Department of Education for around Holocaust education? And if so, do we know how they're doing it, organizing that?
There is. There's certainly still professional development days. I know that's changed with, teacher rules. Professional development days are changing for teachers. But yes, I know organizations around the state are constantly holding webinars with and through the Department of Education, along with groups like the ADL, Connecticut Voices of Hope, to give teachers additional training on not just the Holocaust, but other genocides. It does happen, yes.
I know the three of you have much experience in this area as well. So resourcing teachers, especially K-12 and or professors with the best resources given the breadth of options out there.
Yeah, I could speak to this very briefly. Jewish on Campus has been around for 2.5 years now, so we are by far the youngest organization on this panel, but we have had the privilege of being involved on the government end on a lot of exciting things recently. We were part of the round table hosted by the White House with Second Testament a couple months ago. We've had meetings since then with the White House and members of Congress. One in particular I'll talk about is with the office of Congressman Gottheimer, who was one of the co-sponsors of the HEAL Act, which is a really, really essential act, which is granting resources for Holocaust education, among other things. And we talked about the need for 2 things, so I guess I'll tell you guys a bit about what we think are 2 of the really, really essential things that can be helpful resources for teachers. Number 1 is to understand, like I said earlier, that the Holocaust didn't begin with the rise, anti-Semitism in Germany didn't begin with the Holocaust, and anti-Semitism globally didn't end with the Holocaust. And also, speaking directly with students who have, first of all, gone to public schools where there has been a lack of education on the Holocaust, students who've had successful experiences to learn from those and see what was fruitful and what's not fruitful. I'm sure all of us here have our own experience with Holocaust education. Going back to my own, I'm going to always reflect upon my own stories because that's kind of the whole nature of what we do as an organization. I went again to public school on Long Island where there are no shortage of Jews. But the only education that we ever got about the Holocaust was a really graphic slideshow once a year showing emaciated bodies on a train, and that was it. And we never learned about anti-Semitism in Europe predating the Holocaust. We never learned about anti-Semitism in the global conversation today. So speaking directly with students and understanding what's missing from a student perspective, and also what are the growing trends of anti-Semitism, and how can we use the Holocaust education as an opportunity to reflect upon that as well, I think are the two biggest things that I would advocate for students, and those are things that we've spoken about as well with lawmakers, and they've been so receptive, and to have the privilege to speak with people in positions of that much strength is something that's really unique for students and something that we don't take for granted.
I think let's go to some other audience questions. None at all? Okay. Yes, we have a couple more here.
Okay, this is a tough one. This is for Julia, Rachel, and Jake. I grew up in the 1970s. I'm the first generation of America who really intermarried. I'm wondering if the rise of anti-Semitism is saying to young Jewish men and women, maybe it's time to circle the wagons, and if I date and I want a partner for the rest of my life, they've got to be Jewish. That happening?
Well, I wouldn't be here, for one. So I think let me talk about the question earlier about the impact of why one does this work and see if it kind of gets to answer your question. You know, growing up in Colorado, being raised, you know, in a Christian setting, because my dad actually grew up Orthodox in Boston, Orthodox Jewish. So in his mind, when he married his second wife, my mom, who was, you know, a Pan Am flight attendant and Christian from Canada, he was honoring his tradition by raising us in her tradition, because that's how he thought about his upbringing. He raised the kids in the mother's tradition, because that's how he was thinking in his own. In a way, he was honoring it's very inverse. He was honoring his tradition in his mind by letting our mom raise us Christian. But anyway, well, we had aunts and uncles here on the East Coast when we visit every summer, from my dad's sister in Northampton, Mass, and my brother from his first marriage in Wellesley, Mass, both Reform, who were very intentional about bringing my sister and myself to synagogue, saying, we want you to understand and know the importance of your dad's side of the family and the religion, and understand it and respect it. And I like to say the most important thing is, if you have relatives, a lot of you might be aunts and uncles someday. If you have relatives who are not Jewish, don't assume that they're allies just because they have Jewish relatives. They can be bystanders just as easily because they've not been educated on the importance of standing up if they hear anti-Semitism. So it was because my aunts and my half-brother educated my sister and myself on the importance of Judaism, the importance of our Jewish family and tradition, even though we were being raised religiously, and we very clear distinction as not Jewish. That's why not only am I an ally, but I work for ADL full-time and dedicated my life and career to this work of fighting anti-Semitism. So I certainly I'm glad they chose to get married and have kids, and I'm not going to say, the most important thing is not assuming that your extended family who aren't Jewish are automatically allies because they have Jewish family members. They can be bystanders in these instances of microaggressions of anti-Semitism in their lives because they've not learned to stand up. So educate, have the conversations, and by the way, invite. I'm at ADL, and it was interesting. All of my board members, we have 86 board members, all assumed that somebody had invited me to high holidays. And because they all assumed each other invited me, nobody invited me to go to synagogue with them. And I wanted to be invited, so I mentioned that. So now I have 86 invitations for next year. Wow. So that's sort of an example of, invite your family members, invite friends, talk about your tradition, help build understanding through the stories. I'm supposed to be moderator or not talk, but I really care about that question. So I wouldn't be here if my parents hadn't. Go ahead. Anyone else want to talk about? Or should we go to the next question?
I can jump in really quickly just about campuses. I think Hillel is, our tagline is all kinds of Jewish. We see all kinds of Jewish students, whether that's matrilineal Jews, patrilineal Jews, allies of the community who just really love free food. There's all kinds of students that we serve, and we want to make sure that the diversity of Jewish life is represented, and that students can see the plethora of ways that we can express our Jewish identities. I think when it comes to anti-Semitism, however, Hillel and ADL put out a report from last academic year that showed that 15% or so of Jewish students admitted to hiding part of their Jewish identity when talking to non-Jews or meeting new people on campus. And I fear that number is actually higher, just anecdotally meeting students and seeing and hearing from them. And so wanting to make sure that anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem, it is a communal problem. It is something that affects everyone in the community to know that, oh, my friend feels like they can't share openly a huge part of them because they don't want to be asked about Israel the first time they say that they're Jewish. They don't want to be, met with, oh, well, where's your payas, where's your hat, And so we want to make sure that on an educational level that students feel empowered and have agency to be able to speak up and proudly be Jewish. But sadly, I'm hearing, of students who don't want to write an article about an experience they experienced, or even afraid of reporting. Sometimes they're like, can I report this anonymously? I know, Julia, you deal a lot with that as well. Just the repercussions that can come of that. So as proud as we can, making sure students on campus feel like they can loudly proclaim their Judaism, marry whoever they want to marry, but know that they have a strong, Jewish home at Hillel on their campus.
Yeah, and to echo something that Rachel said, I think one of the most important things from my generation that we're seeing is spaces being open for all Jews of any background. So I think a lot of what pushes people away from being a part of the community is spaces excluding them. So if someone comes from a family where one parent is Jewish and one parent isn't Jewish, and they feel like they can't go to Hillel or they can't go to synagogue, they're not going to be welcomed in that space, then they're never going to connect with their Jewish history because it's not a place that includes them. But if we make our spaces open to everyone, then we actually are able to create a more robust Jewish community through having, the most people feeling included as possible. So I think that's the most essential piece, is making sure that no Jews are left out, because unfortunately, like we saw in the Holocaust and like we see still today, whether you have one Jewish grandparent or 4 Jewish grandparents, we're all victims of the same hatred, so we should all be a part of the same community, and we should all be, welcoming each other into the same spaces, in my view.
Macy, anything you want to add before we go to closing remarks?
If you don't mind, I was just going to circle back to the previous question about resources.
Yes.
Just to mention our educational platform, USC Shoah Foundation's educational platform. It's called eyewitness.usc.edu. It is overwhelming with resources. To get back to Michael's point, it does have over 5,000 or about 5,000 full testimonies, 1,500 downloadable clips, and over 1,000 ready-made standards-based activities. But there are robust search features, so you can search by how much time you have to teach a particular lesson, which genocide you want to address. It is largely Holocaust-based education, but we do have lessons specifically on the other genocides, as well as in a variety of languages. So, yeah, thank you for letting me make that plug.
Of course. So we're coming up to our end time, and I know that I want to make sure that we give the microphone back to our organizers. Again, just before we do closing remarks, my only closing remark is to say thank you to UConn Hillel, to Edina, to your amazing staff, and to Yana, who had this vision and made it a reality. So can we all do a quick round of applause? I got to be the lucky ADL employee who got to go to a flagship state university for this moment where education is happening versus a politician's office. So thank you for inviting me. And I think going around, anything left unsaid and sort of what your hope would be. You're speaking to a room of students. This is a different sort of audience, and maybe one that's maybe familiar to many of you, but what what is your hope for UConn and for this conversation going forward? We started with Nina. Thank you again for your remarks and for sharing it. I know it'll stay with me through my entire career with ADL. So what are you hoping for going forward? And any, of course, any last plugs for your organization that's also a necessity in this sort of event going forward. Thank you. Starting again in the same order we introduced ourselves. How about that?
Yeah, well, I guess this is not an unfamiliar audience for me because I'm one of you guys and I work with students every single day. And the closing piece that I want to remind everyone here is that your stories and your experiences are important, and that you should never feel like you have to wait to be a leader until you're old and gray. I think what we're getting to see today in the Jewish community, but also outside of the Jewish community, is young people standing up and being leaders and saying what has to be said today. And I think that that's such an inspiring legacy that our generation has really, really honed in on, and that there are places for you to be a leader, and that you should take full advantage of those. And that Jewish on Campus is one of them, and we have so many ways to get involved, whether those be through our ambassador program or through other avenues. Please reach out to me. You can DM me on Instagram or email me, juliajossi@jewishoncampus.org. And that if after that you do have an experience with anti-Semitism, I mean, a lot of what we do is tracking those interpersonal experiences, but also working with students to navigate what the resources are, and we often will work with our partners over at Hillel and EDL to make sure that everyone's on the same, working on it together. So really just want to echo the strength of our partners here on this call as well. And thank you guys so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here. And Nina, an honor again to hear your story. Thank you so much for letting us have the privilege of witnessing your story.
I think I'll say in terms of hope, while we're seeing a national historic rise in anti-Semitism and triple the number of reported incidents than 4 years ago, and 30% increases from last year, something I really want to highlight is that Hillel, we're seeing also some of the highest engagement numbers that we've ever seen. And maybe that's post-COVID, we're finally kind of seeing, communities thriving again. But it also means that students are not shying away from community. And my message is to hopefully, invite someone, a Jewish person, a non-Jewish person you don't know, to Shabbat dinner, to experience Jewish joy. A lot of times we get caught up in anti-Semitism, and it's what I think the 3 of us do all day, 4 of us do all day every day. But Deborah Lipstadt, and Julie, you quoted her as well, she has like this oi and joy, right? Like we can't get lost in recording our anti-Semitic incidents and like only talking about Judaism in the framework of anti-Semitism. Those people say, I only see posts about Jews when they're, talking about how bad things are. Like amplify our Jewish joy and making sure that we're, fully expressing our Jewishness and enjoying all the holidays and the food and all the different parts of our identities that are so special. I mean, not getting caught up and bogged down in our enemies or people that want to tear us down. And so we're seeing, like I said, high numbers of engagement. And that's to the work of incredible professionals like Adina and Sapir, the Israel Fellow at UConn, who I know and love. So incredible work to our Hillel partners and making sure that every student feels welcome and has a space to be Jewish on their campus.
Thank you. I will just say that something that gives me hope is the breadth of resources that are available from all of the partners here as well as beyond. And echo everyone in saying, if you do feel overwhelmed or aren't sure where to start, please feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is lschawe@usc.edu. I think that and other resources will be circulated after this. But then also, just as somebody that's learning about how to be an ally continually, right? Like something that sticks with me is the very practical tip of when you do recognize anti-Semitism, right? And if nobody is in direct danger, right, including you, and you do have an opportunity to start a conversation, right? One way of maybe doing it in a not so confrontational way would be, saying something like, hey, I think that might be anti-Semitism. Do you want to talk about it, right? And that can lead into a conversation about the components and consequences of this particular hate. And then that might even open up, right, to think about how this hate overlaps with other types of hate, right? But again, thank you to everyone for sharing their experiences and the resources. I really appreciate it.
First question is, for any of you travel, UConn brought about 200, 250 students to the Capitol about a month ago. Any of you there? Okay. So my hope is that we're always looking for advocates. We would love for you to be allies in this. Government, access to government is an incredibly powerful thing where it is true. It's not cliche that one person can affect and make change. So my hope is that you all will take this, become, if you're not already, but become upstanders for not just the Jewish community, but any marginalized community for that matter, and help spread the word. The easiest way is social media. If you see something wrong or someone posts something, speak out against it. I mean, that's the easiest way in this day and the most effective, and especially if it can go viral in a positive way. So appreciate the time. Hopefully I'll see you one of these days in the legislative office building being an advocate.
So, as our panelists mentioned, I will be sending out a follow-up email with all of their information if you want to reach out for more questions, each of their own resources that they sent to me, and I will share via email. So as long as you signed in at the front, we have your email. So be on the lookout for a follow-up email if you want to get in touch with any of them, if you want to learn more about the organizations. I personally was really moved by this. I mean, I am very much interested in government legislative work, especially when it comes to the Jewish community. So I thank each and every one of you for coming here and talking about educational resources, legislative resources, how we can work together in our communities, also with local government, with federal government. And yeah, thank you, Jake, Michael, Julia, Rachel, and Lacey for joining us today.
To reiterate that this has been a lot of talking about the bad, but as Michael mentioned and as Rachel mentioned, there's a lot of good to talk about it within as well, and right here on campus too, right? Hillel, we hope, is a place for you all to feel at home, whether you're Jewish or not, all kinds of Jewish and beyond. The building is always available for you all to come and use the space, to talk to any of the staff members. Every Friday night we have Shabbat services at 6 and Shabbat dinner at 7, and we really encourage you to feel not only like it's a place that's welcoming and an environment for you, but also a place that can be your advocate. That if you are having a hard time within your own Jewish identity or being a proud Jew on campus, that we can help you with that and be an advocate and guide you to the right resources. So thank you all again so much for coming. Turn it over.
We just had a couple of gifts for our panelists. We wanted to say a big thank you, and to our panelists virtually, we will be sending a thank you letter via mail. But this is for you, Michael. This is for you, Jake.
Thank
and
you.
then we have something for Nina as well. Thank you so much again.
Nice meeting you all.
Thank you all for having us. Bye, everyone.